9 years old, 60 pounds. On the afternoon of March 6, 1959, she stepped out of her house with 7 boxes of mints and vanished from the world. This isn't the story of a child who simply lost her way. This is the account of a predator who hunted the most defenseless target on the block. The resolution would remain buried for 62 years, outlasting 3 generations of investigators, and waiting inside a single glass jar in an evidence room. To comprehend the magnitude of the tragedy, we must return to that cold Friday. You have to understand who Candy Rogers actually was. Spokane, Washington, 1959. It was an era of unlocked doors and children walking to school without a second thought. West Central was a blue-collar neighborhood of modest homes and familiar faces where every neighbor was known. No one watched the clock when the kids were out. There was no reason for fear. Candy lived in an apartment above a local grocery store on the 2000 block of West Mission Avenue with her mother. Her mother, Elaine, was a teacher. Her grandparents lived just next door. She had a dog named Shep and a very small frame for her age. Standing 4 feet 4 inches and weighing 60 pounds, she was naturally shy. But she took immense pride in being a Bluebird Scout. It was her purpose. March 6, 1959, was the opening day of the annual mint sale. School let out at 3:15. By 3:30, she had collected her inventory from her troop leader's house. She had a goal: sell enough to earn a badge and win a week at summer camp. She could only carry 7 boxes. She was too small for more. She went home and waited for the 4 o'clock start time. In those final minutes, she shared an oatmeal cookie with her grandmother and played with Shep. She discussed her route and which neighbors were a guaranteed sale. She wasn't afraid. She was determined. At exactly 4 o'clock, Candy Rogers stepped into the biting March air and began knocking on doors. In the Northwest, early March brings a fast darkness. By 5:40, the streetlights were glowing. Candy knew the boundary: home before the lights. When 5:30 passed with no sign of her, her grandfather went out to find her. He checked the neighbors. He walked the length of the block. No one had seen her. Elaine returned from a hair appointment to find her daughter missing. Within the hour, the entire family was scouring the streets. Police were summoned by nightfall. The neighborhood was full of other girls in the same uniforms that evening. Dozens of children in identical clothes carrying identical boxes made tracing Candy's specific path a near impossibility. Witnesses reported sightings but couldn't confirm the child's identity. Then, at 9 o'clock, the search shifted. A discovery was made that changed the nature of the case. On Pettit Drive, along the slope of Doomsday Hill, mint boxes were found strewn across the pavement, not dropped, scattered. The boxes looked like they had been hurled from a speeding vehicle. The trail led south across the bridge, away from her home. One box yielded a partial fingerprint. It was preserved and sent to the bureau, but no match was found. By 9 that night, Spokane understood a terrible truth. Candy Rogers hadn't wandered off. She hadn't gotten lost. Someone had taken her. The question was who, and why her? Why this specific child among all the others out on that freezing Friday afternoon? The answer was in plain sight, yet it would remain hidden for 62 years. By the morning of March 7th, the entire city knew. More than 1,200 volunteers arrived to join the search. A massive mobilization for one girl. Marines, scouts, and local workers all joined the effort. They descended on West Central Spokane before the sun had even risen. A command post was established at the bridge where the boxes were found. The Air Force provided helicopters for the aerial hunt. There were no digital tools, no GPS, no mobile phones. There were only discarded boxes, a nameless print, and a trail that ended at the edge of a bridge. On March 7th, tragedy struck again. A search helicopter hit power lines and crashed into the Spokane River. 3 crew members were killed: Airman Ray, Sergeant McDonald, and Lieutenant Fout. 3 men died searching for one child. The city was now mourning on two fronts, and Candy was still gone. The ensuing days were defined by a heavy, suffocating silence. Thousands of tips poured in from across the country. Investigators followed every single ghost. Investigators reached out to everyone with a relevant record. In 1959, sex offender registries did not exist. Several potential suspects were identified. No evidence linked any of them to the girl's disappearance. 16 days passed in silence. On March 21st, two airmen from Fairchild Air Force Base went hunting in the woods off Old Trails Road, roughly 7 miles from the Rogers home. Moving through the timber near an abandoned quarry, they spotted a shape by a tree. It was a pair of small girls' shoes, neatly placed. They were not dropped in haste. They were left. The men returned to base to report the find, and a search party arrived by daybreak. Within minutes, a searcher moved a layer of brush and pine needles. There, they found Candy Rogers. She had been hidden beneath dead tree boughs and branches, roughly 50 yards from the roadway. Richard Obering, a retired Spokane police captain, was among the officers who stood over her that morning. That image would haunt him forever. He was still alive 62 years later when the killer was finally identified. The cause of death was confirmed as strangulation. The ligature was a strip of cloth torn from Candy's own slip. It was the garment she wore when she left home that Friday. Her feet had been bound with another torn fragment of the same clothing. A mark around her waist suggested she may have been restrained with a rope, though none was recovered at the scene. Medical examiners uncovered evidence of a much darker physical violation. It was a detail that added a new layer of horror to the crime. Every fragment of evidence was meticulously cataloged. Everything was preserved. In 1959, they could not foresee the forensic technology of the future. Yet, they saved the biological material for decades they would never see. The discovery of Candy's body permanently altered the soul of Spokane. The impact spanned generations. The era of children walking alone ended. Parents watched from windows. They enforced rigid new boundaries. This tragedy became a dark foundation for how children were raised in the city. It was a grim lesson passed from parent to child. The police possessed physical evidence. They held a DNA profile they did not yet have the means to utilize. There was a quiet hope that science would eventually provide the resolution they sought. But the path to truth was about to be obscured. A serial killer would enter the investigation and trigger a 40-year dead end. Every detail in this reconstruction represents an exhaustive search through the archives. It is a process of reconciling facts with the lives lost. The investigation of such events requires weeks of scrutiny. It is a pursuit of truth that often extends deep into the night. This work continues because the victims deserve more than a footnote. They deserve to be remembered. To ensure these mysteries reach their conclusion, consider the importance of remaining vigilant. Reflect on which element of this tragedy is most haunting. Public awareness is vital to the pursuit of justice. For those seeking further resolutions to long-dormant crimes, additional records are available. Now, we return to the investigation. For decades, Spokane detectives believed they had identified the culprit. They had a name, a history, and evidence that seemed to point to one man. For 40 years, the case against him seemed unshakable. It was an utter fabrication. The reality is far more unsettling. The actual killer never appeared in a single tip or police report during 62 years of searching. While the department focused on a shadow, the killer lived a quiet life in the same city. He raised a family and died before being suspected. His name was Hugh Bion Morse. He was a member of the Spokane Motorcycle Club. He was a man who moved through the community without ever raising an alarm. When Candy vanished, he did not hide. He joined the search party. He walked those streets alongside the grieving and the police, searching for a child he knew was dead. He lived blocks from her home. 4 years prior, in California, he was detained for attempting to molest 2 Girl Scouts. They had been selling cookies door to door. It was a terrifying precursor to what happened to Candy. Less than a year after her body was found, Morse raped and murdered 2 women in Spokane before continuing his violence across the country. He committed at least 7 more violent acts before his 1961 capture. A neighbor recognized him from a federal wanted poster. He died in a Minnesota prison in April 2003 while serving 2 life sentences. His profile matched the Rogers case perfectly. He targeted young girls selling items door to door. He was local. And then there was the matter of the gum. At nearly every scene where he struck, investigators discovered grape-flavored gum. It was a signature so consistent that it became a known detail linking him to his crimes. During the 1959 autopsy, a detective noticed a purple stain on Candy's clothing. Upon closer inspection, it carried a distinct grape scent. That single, small observation would eventually become a pillar of the entire investigation. Over decades, as the image of Morse as a predator solidified, that single stain anchored the prosecution's theory. It remained untested. It was never proven. A mere assumption calcified into absolute certainty, misleading every investigator who touched the case for 40 years. Everything shifted in 2001. Detective Mindy Connolly sent the victim's clothing to a forensics laboratory. Technicians extracted a biological sample from the stored evidence and constructed a complete genetic profile. For the first time in 42 years, the state held more than just suspicion. They compared the results to Hugh Morse. There was no match. The stain, the behavioral patterns, the locations, none of it mattered. The biology was definitive. They entered the profile into the national database. Total silence, no hits. The actual perpetrator had avoided any arrest that would have required a genetic submission. He had never once appeared on a list of potential suspects. Across 62 years, his name was absent from every tip and report. He existed in plain sight, yet no one ever turned their gaze toward him. Only one factor explains why this mystery was finally unraveled. It was not just the investigators or the modern tech. While vital, those were not the catalyst. None of it succeeds without a choice made by an anonymous officer in 1959, decades before genetic testing was even a concept. An unknown hand placed the evidence inside a glass jar and twisted the lid tight. That seal bridges a 9-year-old's death in 1959 to a match in 2021. Glass resists decay. It rejects moisture. It remains indifferent to whatever is trapped within its walls. This vacuum, created when genetic science was science fiction, offered a flawless sanctuary for the evidence. When the glass was finally unsealed in the early 2000s, the genetic material was remarkably intact. It yielded a full profile. The original officers could never have grasped the significance of what they were protecting, yet they preserved it nonetheless. Britney Wright was raised in Spokane. During her youth, her parents invoked the name of the victim not as history, but as a warning. Be careful. Remember what happened to her. The tragedy was stitched into the local parenting style, enduring long after the initial horror had faded. Wright eventually became a forensics specialist for the Washington State Patrol. By 2018, as the city re-examined its unsolved murders, this specific file arrived on her desk. This timing was far from coincidental. In 2018, California police used genetic genealogy to capture the Golden State Killer, a predator who had hidden for 40 years. The method cross-references crime scene samples with public ancestry sites to locate distant kin of an unidentified suspect. Experts then construct complex family trees until the focus narrows to a single individual. Once that arrest dominated global headlines, police departments everywhere revisited their coldest cases. They ask, could this be the key? Spokane immediately raised that question regarding this case. However, a significant obstacle remained. The genetic material, though shielded from the elements, had still succumbed to 60 years of slow degradation. It was further compromised by foreign contamination. In 2020, Wright sent the material to a specialized private lab. The lab returned it. Too much decay. They walked away from the case. That refusal felt like the end of the line. The national database was empty. Every lead had withered. If genealogy failed, the investigation was essentially dead. Then, word reached Wright of a laboratory in Texas known as Othram. This facility focuses precisely on the difficult samples that other institutions refuse to touch. They pioneered a specific sequencing method designed for samples that are heavily contaminated or nearly exhausted. In February 2021, Wright reached out. They agreed to try. She carefully prepared the final traces of the evidence. By then, only a few drops remained. She shipped them to Texas. Othram went to work. They constructed a genetic profile and scanned the public databases. The search narrowed to 3 brothers, all dead, all from the local area: John Ray Hoff, James Andrew Hoff, Terry Allen Hoff. Science cannot differentiate between siblings in a family tree. To pinpoint who left their mark on the victim's clothes, a final step was needed. Police required a living descendant. Of the 3 men, only one had fathered children. A single path remained. Detective Stormant dialed a woman who had always believed her father's death was merely a tragic end to a private struggle. She was entirely unprepared for the revelation. Through 62 years of scrutiny, the name John Ray Hoff never surfaced. No reports, no witness lists, not even a footnote. Detective Storm stated it clearly. He was invisible to the law until September 6, 2021. A single phone call shattered a life's quietude. Stormant reached Kathy Hoff, introducing himself as a cold case detective seeking her assistance. Within 45 minutes of hanging up, she stood before the Spokane police headquarters. Suspicion had already taken root. Instead of waiting for answers, she turned to the digital archives. She searched. During that 45-minute interval, she uncovered the account of a 9-year-old girl slain in Spokane in 1959 while vending mints. When she crossed the threshold of the precinct, the burden of a dark realization already pressed upon her. Kathy provided her genetic profile immediately. The findings arrived on September 8, 2021. Material from Candy's garments proved 2,900,000 times more likely to belong to a relative of Kathy than a stranger. The source was her father. Yet, justice faced a biological wall. John Hoff was dead. With no courtroom, no cross-examination, and no defense, the full weight of absolute proof fell solely upon the detectives. Scientific absolute was the only standard. Armed with a warrant, they exhumed John Ray Hoff's remains on September 23, 2021. The report dated October 1st was definitive. The odds the genetic material matched Hoff over a random individual were 25 quintillion to 1. That is 25, followed by 18 zeros. Doubt cannot exist at that scale. The mystery ended. John Ray Hoff entered the world on August 11, 1938, in Spokane. His childhood home stood on the 2500 block of West College Avenue. He was no transient. He was a neighbor. Retrospective analysis of his youth reveals the emerging silhouette of a predator. At 16, in 1955, he fled a juvenile detention center near Olympia before being apprehended near Yakima. Criminality led to the military. Enlisting at 17, the Army stationed him at Nike missile sites guarding Fairchild Air Force Base, near his own doorstep. By March 6, 1959, his residence was 221 West Broadway Avenue. Candy lived on the 220 block of West Mission Avenue. Only 1 mile separated them. 2 years following Candy's death, in 1961, police arrested Hoff in West Spokane for second-degree assault. He had seized a woman. He stripped her by force, bound her with her own clothes, and strangled her before vanishing. She lived. Observe the ritual. He utilized the victim's own garments as restraints. He converted her clothing into a garrote. The scene was an identical signature to the Candy Rogers case. The binding on Candy's neck was torn from her own slip. Her ankles were tied with another strip of the same garment. The victim in 1961 survived only because he was interrupted. Candy did not. Hoff served 6 months. Following that conviction, the Army labeled him a deserter and issued a dishonorable discharge. He drifted between jobs, selling knives door to door. He worked a lumber yard and a meatpacking plant, suffering a facial chemical burn. He was not a man building a future. There is a detail about Hoff that resonates with particular cruelty. He had a stepsister. In 1959, she was a 10-year-old campfire girl. She was Candy's assigned big sister, the older girl meant to guide the young bluebird. She knew Candy. She loved her. When Candy vanished and the city joined the search, this girl was broken. She sat by John Hoff and wept. She spoke of how she missed her little campfire sister. She told him it was horrific. He sat in total silence. John Ray Hoff died in 1970 before justice could reach him. He put a bullet in his own head. He chose his daughter's 9th birthday. It was the same age Candy Rogers had been when he raped and murdered her. Whether driven by guilt or coincidence, he took the answer with him. When investigators located his grave, the discovery caused the room to go silent. For 51 years, John Ray Hoff was buried in the same cemetery as Candy Rogers. The child he abducted and strangled with her own clothing was buried there. He rested there as well, just yards away, for over 5 decades. While her family mourned at her grave and sought answers, her killer lay in the same earth. He was in the same city, in total silence. No one knew. His name had never entered the investigation. Detective Storm informed Hoff's family once the DNA was confirmed. He spoke these words at the press conference. Quote, "I took those people's lives and their childhood and dumped it on its head." End quote. He was not exaggerating. Kathy had spent her life believing her father died from a struggle with depression. That was the family narrative. It was how they processed his death. During a single police interview, the narrative shifted. It was replaced by a reality no one could have anticipated. The grief remained, heavy and absolute. The situation shifted into a deeper, more complex moral territory. Upon discovering he shared a resting place with Candy, his relatives acted of their own volition. They initiated the process to exhume his remains and relocate them to a separate graveyard, ensuring that Candy, in the words of Detective Stormant, could enjoy some peace. This development left Candy's cousin Joanne visibly shaken by the weight of the news. This offering from the perpetrator's kin was not a restoration of justice. It was simply the only tribute they were capable of providing. A lingering thread remains. Hoff's stepsister. She is currently in her 70s. Once the mystery was unraveled, Stormant located her to reveal her brother's true nature. The detective described her as absolutely heartbroken. She recounted memories of sitting beside John Hoff and weeping over the loss of Candy, sharing the depth of her devastation with him, mourning the girl she called her campfire sister. He remained silent, a passive observer. For decades, she bore that sorrow as a witness, completely unaware that the architect of her trauma sat within reach, silently absorbing her grief without a trace of guilt. During a formal briefing on November 19th, a recorded video statement from Kathy Hoff was presented to the public. Her words lacked evasion or excuses. Quote, "I'm very, very sorry for what my dad did, that he took her life horribly." Quote, "I hope that it gives her peace, knowing that even though it's not really justice because he doesn't get any punishment, his name has this on it now." Quote, "And they can know it's solved." These words demand a moment of quiet reflection. There will be no trial, no prison sentence, and no courtroom confrontation where the law looks John Hoff in the eye and names his depravity. He had already slipped beyond the reach of human authority. Kathy offered the sole remaining currency, acknowledgement. His identity is now inextricably linked to his crime. The history books are amended. While insufficient for justice, it is not without meaning. Retired Captain Richard Obering attended the conference. On March 22, 1959, he was among the officers who discovered Candy's remains. He was the one who cleared the debris and pine needles to find what Hoff had discarded in the woods. That scene remained etched in his mind for 62 years. He survived long enough to finally hear the resolution. Quote, "I thank God," he stated, "that I lived long enough to see the end of this case." When questioned about the total hours poured into the Candy Rogers file over 62 years, an emotional Detective Stormant declined to provide a figure. Quote, "This isn't measured in hours, this is measured in careers." 3 successive waves of investigators had carried this burden. Each generation passed the file to the next with a singular, unspoken command: do not let her be forgotten. The final team held firm. Joanne, Candy's cousin, spoke through her tears. "I feel like Candy's loss was just a horrible loss." Quote, "She was so cute, and she didn't have much time." Candy Rogers was only 9 years old. She was a girl who dreamed of earning badges, loved her dog Shep, cherished her grandmother's oatmeal cookies, and knew every neighbor on her block. She possessed a future that was hers by natural right, yet it was extinguished on a freezing Friday in March 1959 by a 20-year-old soldier living barely a mile away, a man never even considered. The woman she might have become remains an enigma. We are left only with the facts. Her life was significant enough to mobilize 1,200 searchers and to haunt investigators for 6 decades. A scientist, raised on the legend of her disappearance, refused to let the trail go cold, submitting one final sample to a specialized laboratory. Ultimately, she mattered enough for the killer's own daughter to stand before a camera and brand her father's name with the truth. 62 years, 8 months, and 13 days. This was the duration of Candy Rogers' wait. The pendulum has finally ceased its swing. One must wonder how many 1950s cold cases still hold biological evidence in storage, awaiting the application of current technology to provide resolution. In 1961, John Hoff perpetrated a strikingly similar attack, yet served a mere 6 months in confinement. Had that early punishment mirrored the actual threat he represented, would this investigation have ever reached such a tragic duration? We are left to question the nature of justice when the only penalty a predator pays is the late-stage exposure of his identity long after he has escaped into the grave. The echo of silence. Lessons from Candy Rogers. The disappearance of 9-year-old Candy Rogers in 1959 is not just a cold case. It is a profound testament to the enduring weight of justice and the sanctity of a child's life. Her story carries vital lessons for every generation. The immortal nature of truth. No secret is buried deep enough to escape the light of time. For 62 years, the killer lived in plain sight. Yet he could not outrun the biological footprint he left behind. Truth does not decay. It waits for the technology to name it. Vigilance as a legacy. This tragedy permanently altered the soul of Spokane, ending an era where children walked alone. It serves as a grim reminder that community safety is not a given, but a continuous commitment to remaining vigilant and protecting the most defenseless. The silent heroes of preservation. Justice was only possible because an unknown officer in 1959 chose to seal evidence in a glass jar, decades before genetic testing was even a concept. We must honor the meticulous integrity of those who protect the evidence of today for the resolutions of tomorrow. The burden of accountability. Even when a predator escapes human law through the grave, the power of acknowledgement remains. By branding a killer's name with his crimes, we reclaim the history books for the victims, ensuring they are remembered as more than just a footnote. Candy's wait lasted 62 years, 8 months, and 13 days. Her legacy is a call to never let a trail go cold, and to believe that every victim deserves a resolution, no matter how many lifetimes it takes.